I just wanted to make a quick commentary of the book of Judith, which I've just completed my first reading of it, which I recorded and put it online. It needs doing again, but it's a place marker at least. Um, I'd read Judith once before in Italy, in Italian. I think it was in Italian. I was interested particularly in the book of Judith when I went to the library and just asked for a Bible. I didn't know what they would give me, and they gave me what must have been a Catholic Bible because it had all various apocryphal books in it, and they caught my interest, and particularly Judith because that's the name that I and my wife gave to our daughter. And so she's not a believer, but I thought, well, maybe I'll copy a passage, and I copied out a passage from that book and gave it to her when I came home. Now, when I read the book of Esdras, I saw angels misrepresented, and I thought this is probably the main reason that Esdras has not been included in the canon. When I read Tobias, I'm not sure of the Tobit. I'm not sure of the reason there. I will have to read that book again, I think. I think there will generally be something that tells us why those books are not part of our Bible, which is of course composed of 66. They're separate for a reason. So of course, thinking about the book of Judith, well, what's the reason? There's no angels misbehaving here that I can see, but there is Judith herself, isn't there? Who her martial act, her violent act, is quite remarkable. She used her womanly charms to seduce Olophanes, although the seduction wasn't consummated. The Bible says that he was seduced by her sandals, which is interesting. It's usually a woman's eyes that are used, isn't it, to entice a man, and perhaps it was indeed her eyes. I mean, she would have been a very beautiful woman. There'd be no question of it. She was an Israelite, so she would have been pale-skinned, perhaps fair-haired, ginger-haired, raven. The beauty of our women is absolutely unequaled, and so it would have been fairly straightforward for her to seduce this pagan man, this captain of the army, a great man in his own country, a loyal servant of Nebuchadnezzar. He would have been quite enthralled by the sight of this beautiful Israelite woman. There was great respect for the children of Israel, of course, because people knew that God was on our side. It was very evident. And of course, again, the beauty of our women was voiced throughout the land, actually. And hopefully the honesty of our men and the uprightness of our men. I'm not so sure about that one because, of course, wickedness has always been amongst us, has it not? So I suppose it's Judith's act that was the reason that, the book has hit the Apocrypha. And it did come to my mind slightly. I wonder whether it was, a divine ordinance, or it was more the church that was involved in this, because, of course, we don't really want our weak wives to be chopping our heads off as we sleep. If we can possibly avoid it, brothers, I'd just say that. I mean, you might have not had the best of days, and there's a lot of conflict within the family, and sometimes words are said in a moment of harshness. But you're very vulnerable when you lie alone with a woman in your tent, as it were, especially if you've had a few glasses, which Olophanes had. And I'm sure that Judith was careful to make sure that they were often topped up and encouraging him to inebriation, while she herself would have using these sleight of hand. I expect. I mean, perhaps she just didn't drink at all, or drank very little. I mean, we've seen this kind of scenario played out in the cinema, haven't we, so many times? Men drawn to the pit by being enticed by a woman. Proverbs really, I think chapters 6 and 7 or 8 is it? But they both warn of these, these things. Jezebel was known to be a seductress, and we had to be very careful. So, but of course, Judith was using her seductive powers to save Israel. They were in very grave danger, surrounded by absolutely overwhelmed by the armies of Nebuchadnezzar, and I suppose they were short of, were they not? They were almost without water, and things were looking very hard, and it would have been a great slaughter in the camp. So, Judith's act was absolutely essential, really, I suppose. God can save a nation through various means, can he not? In the Old Testament, there are times when he saved a nation through just a whisper of gossiping, was there not? When he caused a fear to come into the hearts of the army, of the enemy army, and they fled in the night, really afraid of their own shadow. So God has the power. So in this case, he used Judith, did he? Or did Judith usurp his authority by going against certain biblical principles that would not give that role to a woman? I think that's the question, isn't it, really? We admire, I admire a strong woman. I think it's a wonderful thing. And in the Bible, we have, what's her name? Naboth's wife. I've forgotten her name. Abigail. Abigail, who's brave, and but she doesn't chop anybody's head off herself, really, does she? She just takes the reins of the situation. Her gestures are peaceable. All she's done is to usurp her husband's authority because he was a wicked man, and she's taken the reins of the situation. It's not the same as Judith. Esther was, she was a strong woman fighting for the cause of Israel, but again, there was no violence in her hands. I don't think there's any suggestion in the book of Esther that there was a deliberate deceiving of the king, Artaxerxes, was it? Or Ahasuerus he's called, I think. I don't think so. There seems to be no suggestion that her heart was duplicitous. Although I suppose she did marry into a pagan dynasty, but again, it was done for the glory of Israel, wasn't it? So yes, Judith, I suppose that's why it's excluded from the Bible. And the question then is, well, did she do well or did she do poorly in actual fact from a Christian perspective? And I can't answer that question. I don't think anybody can. But I think it's a fair warning to us gentlemen to be careful of beautiful women, always. and particularly those who withhold their favour, it appears, because this is a way in which a man can become quite stupid. At least if the act is consummated and the woman gives herself, then there is a certain fairness, is there not? It's we seek a companion if we're alone. Of course, if I'm speaking of adultery and wickedness, that's another matter. But I'm just speaking of a normal union that may occur between a man and a woman. I mean, if it's honestly offered and honestly taken, then it would be consummated at some point. But this was just a seduction, wasn't it? This was out of a Hollywood movie, really. You can imagine the tents. I'm sure they've made films of it, and it would lend itself, would it not? Interesting thoughts. Good morning, everybody.